Yes, I just email you the slides. Well, so while it's coming to Connecticut, I can introduce myself. Um, so my name is Mustafa Rfat. I am a refugee from Iraq. I am also a person with disabilities. So I am currently a PhD candidate in social work at Washington University in St. Louis. And so, yes, my research focuses on refugees with disabilities. As you know, it's really a reflection of my lived experience as a refugee. Um, yeah, today is a very special day. I cannot pass the day without mentioning that today is the International Day of Person with Disabilities. So I hope that you take a minute to learn about people with disabilities. Worldwide, there's 1. I believe 4 billion people with disabilities, and in the United States, 1 in every 4 person are with disabilities. So yes, so again, I'm very sorry for all the technical issues, as it always happens. But so yeah, my research, currently my dissertation work is on refugees with disabilities and their access to social services. In my slides, we will go over a couple of findings that I will be sharing with you. And so I will also be talking about some background information. Um, so, you know, as I mentioned, I am originally from Iraq. So I was in a refugee camp in Turkey, and I came to the US in 2011. So again, if I were showing my slides, so you know, oftentimes when we talk about refugees, the first thing that we talk about is the legal definition of refugees. Oh, this person is being forced out of their home country, um, and or, you know, like they are dislocated, they are forcibly displaced, etc. What we really miss in our discussion is the social and material loss that refugees um, go through. And that really, from my experience as a person with disabilities, that social and material loss was huge for me, because, as you may know, people with disabilities often rely on their surroundings to conduct their daily lives, on their network, on the social support that they use. And when you are unrooted in such a um, quick and traumatic way, um, it really has a lasting impact on you. Um, and so you know, I really urge you, when you come across refugees, to really think about that social and material belonging. Um, so when it comes to refugees with disabilities, unfortunately, this is the least studied topic, least talked, and like least talked topic as well. So according to one of the UN agencies, refugees with disabilities are the most hidden, neglected, and socially excluded of all displaced people. And I can tell you from my experience, when I was a refugee in Turkey and here in the United States after being resettled, that exclusion, that marginalization hits you very hard because, you know, the element of disability brings different challenge on top of the element of refugee. You know, that combination, makes like things very, very difficult for you. I remember again that element, when you get unrooted from your family, um, like and when you encounter both the stigma from being a refugee, the stigma from being a person with disabilities, it has particular like challenges on you. So I remember, when I was in Turkey, just some of the public comments that when you disclose that you are a person with disabilities, that you are refugees, that the stigma around these two topics and how people really approach you differently. So currently, as you may see from the news, that there are more than 120 million forcibly displaced individual, and this number is just continuing to rise. It's really surprising. When I started my PhD in 2021, the number of forcibly displaced individuals were around, I think, 50 million. And now it's more than 120 million. So I hope this can give you the urgency, the critical issue that the refugee and forcibly displaced issues is becoming worldwide. And all the wars that have started post 2000, almost none of them have been, resolved. If you look at Ukraine, if you look at Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, Sudan, even South American countries who faces a lot of violence. Um, and what we know is that this continued exposure to um, uh, 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 to wars and disability and violence increase the rate of disability. In my current study, I'm collecting data on whether a participant acquired their disability before the war or after the or during or after the war. And I believe I did not do the calculation, but like almost the majority of my participants acquired their disability during or after the war. And it just, shows you how, yes, oh, thank you. Here are the slides. I think you can go to the background. Yes. And you can see how, war and violence really increases the rate of disability. However, you can go to the next slide. When we look at the literature, um, you can barely see any studies, any discussion about refugees with disabilities. In my scoping review that I conducted last year, we found that almost one third of refugees have at least one type of disabilities. And if we look at this number, like worldwide, 16% of people have at least one type of disabilities. Here in the United States is about 24 to 25%. But when it comes to refugee population, it's really more than 35%. There is a rate of disability. However, when we look at the literature of immigration and the literature of disability, we rarely see that any discussion about refugees with disabilities. And later we can see how this negatively impact the lives of people, the lives of refugees uh, on the ground. Um, Again, so one of the implication of this is that refugees with disabilities continue living in the shadows. So, for example, when I came to the United States, my refugee, the refugee organization that resettled me, they were confused what they are going to do with me. Um, yes, I was very ill. I needed help, but I had dreams. I wanted to go back to school. I wanted to learn. I wanted to, pursue an education. However, it was like very confusing for them, and I will later explain why. Um, so, and that led for me to being like really forced out from receiving the support that are available for refugees with disabilities. Next, please. So yes, one of the issues that I myself encounter, that many refugees with disabilities encounter, is that the idea of the identity of disabilities. So I remember it was the first time that I realized that I am a person with disabilities, or I am different, is when I was attending a refugee orientation before coming to the United States. That the person before you get resettled, there is a cultural orientation that prepares you um, to successfully resettle in your new country. So that person was explaining the jobs that are available. And I remember asking him, like, hey, I have physical disabilities. The jobs that you described is really difficult for me to do. And he turned and said, well, you know, you you don't need to work. You can just rely on public assistance when you get to the United States. I mean, as a young man, I think I was like 21 or 21, 20 years old. That was shocking to me. I did not want to stay home and do nothing. Yes, I have challenges, I have issues, but I can learn, I can do things. Um, so at that time, I realized that I am different. I did not really fully develop the disability identity because in Iraq, I was within my family, within my community. So, and there was no disability services back in Iraq. So really, there was no discussion about disabilities. Um, so when I came to the United States, things really were different. I was seen as an outsider. I remember, the social worker. I was put to live with two other refugees, and the social worker, yeah, so three of us resettled and came to the United States at similar times. And I remember like she was preparing them to like, buying them clothes, buying them equipments to prepare them to work. And every time I ask her, like, what about me? What I'm gonna be doing? And she was like, "Oh, never mind, Mustafa. We'll connect you and we'll help you get SSI. SSI is the Supplemental Security Income. It is designed for individuals with disabilities. You get like a basic income. I think it's like $900 a month, and you live on it. Obviously, that was not my goal. So again, like it was a struggle at that time, trying to understand this identity of disability. And it was a struggle for the social worker as well to really seem like she's helping two of my friends and she's confused about this disability identity, what I'm going to do with this person. She's not aware of the services available for people with disabilities. So she doesn't know what disability means, and I myself is not aware, like fully developed that disability identities, where I'm aware that there are services for me. Um, so yeah, next please. So here in the United States, people with disabilities have special like laws that protect their rights. The most dominant one is the ADA, Americans with Disability Act. Here you have the definition. It is really designed to protect and to protect people with disabilities from discrimination, exclusion. Um, However, when it comes to immigration in the United States, we rarely see that this policy is being fully implemented, because people with refugees with disabilities continue living in the margins. And, you know, I don't know if it's intentional or non-intentional, but the impact is severe. Um, Next, please. So, I wanted to give you some background about the United States and its approach to refugees and immigrants with disabilities. So you might be surprised that here in the United States, the first Immigration Act, which was the Immigration Act of 1882, one of the reasons for passing this legislation was to exclude immigrants. I mean, at that time, we did not have the term refugees. So it was immigrants. So it designed to exclude immigrants with disabilities. And in this policy, they labeled immigrants with disabilities as those like any convicted lunatic idiot or any person unable to take care of himself and herself without being a public charge. So this policy was clear that we do not want immigrants in the United States. Um, and this was an active policy until 1960s, I believe. And it really influenced any policy that came after this this uh, this this policy. I mean, it's kind of like the foundation of immigration policies in the United States. Next, please. So here you have a couple of pictures after this policy was implemented that officers at the ports were given a discretion to exclude immigrants with disabilities. So again, these officers did not have any medical background, did not have any idea about disabilities. So they were looking for any abnormalities that they can find and exclude that person. Um, and one of the interesting things about this policy is that even if you were fined, let's say after like 5 years being in the United States, you were found to have disabilities, you were still subject to deportation. Um, Next, please. So you might ask, well, how does this policy is impacting the current policies? So you might ask that how this Immigration Act of 1882 impacting the current immigration policies? Well, the main one is the self-reliance that we have in Refugee Act of 1980. So when they acted this Refugee Act, they added statements there that required refugees to be self-sufficient within the first month they resettle in the United States. And that really divided employable refugees with non-employable refugees. Again, going back to my story, that when we were sitting in the living room and when that social workers used to come to our home, she used to basically divide us. These two refugees who are employable will get the support, will get the assistance that they need so they can be employable and they can access employment. And that person who is not rapidly and quickly employable will be just disregarded and will wait until they can apply for SSI. And this really has significant impact on the lives of refugees with disabilities. Um, one of the issues that I encounter is that because I did not get employment support from the refugee organization, I was really forced to find employment by myself. And that what led to is, um, for example, being target of marginalization. Like the job that I found, even though at that time I think the minimum wage was like $7, something like that. That employer was giving me $2 or $3, something like that, the half of the minimum wage for me to work with him. So that really forced me to this like dark hole of finding employment by myself. Um, Next, please. Again, so what this really led to that rapid employment, that refugees need to be employed as soon as possible, is the division between employable and non-employable. And that has also implication for the practice. So that means that social workers or refugee organization workers do not have time to uh, be connected with disability organizations or really understand what disability is all about or how they can help refugees with disabilities. So their focus is on those employable refugees. And that again, that really has severe implication for, again, one third of refugee population. So if we resettled like 3 million refugees since 1980s, almost 1 million of them have at least one type of disabilities. Next, please. So why disability organizations? Why refugees with disabilities needs to be connected to disability organizations. So early on, after I think it was about 2 years after being resettled in the United States, I finally was able to apply to college. And in my first week, I was just like other students carrying my backpack. I put all these heavy books and I was carrying it around on my campus. West Virginia University in Morgantown, West Virginia is very hill-like. It's very steep. So in my first week, I was hospitalized. And because of the back pain, I have back problems, I have physical disabilities. So while at the hospital, I remember these voices that were telling me, oh, Mustafa, you are incapable of attending school, you can't work, all these, negative statements that I received. And I was like, yes, I think they were right that I cannot attend the school. School is not designed for me. Maybe I need to just rely on SSI and live my life. I was lucky that I was in social work. And I remember my supervisor, the advisor reached out to me and she's like, where are you, Mustafa? And I told her, like, listen, I can't carry my books. I can't carry my notebooks. So I guess, I can't attend college. She was like, no, this should not be a reason for you to not attend college. There are disability organizations in the community that they can come up with ideas to help you. So just come to my office. So she guided me to a disability organization called Center for Excellence in Disabilities. And I went there, I explained my problems. They were like, well, here are a couple of solutions. They borrowed me an iPad, they put all my books, and I can take my notes in this iPad, which is like a pound or 2 pounds. And they borrowed me a backpack that has wheels. So with this simple, brilliant ideas, I was able to go back to school and I was just, dragging this a backpack and I did not need to carry it. And I graduated with my bachelor's with honors. So you can see the value of, connecting refugees to disability organizations because they have these specialized uh, knowledge that they can help refugees with disabilities. So next, please. So this is a finding from my current study that I'm doing on refugees with disabilities. I'm looking at their access to employment, education, healthcare, and housing. And one of the questions that I'm asking them is, um, you know, have you heard of disability programs? Have you used disability programs? And I want to underline here that you have a refugee with disabilities who've been in the United States for 1 year, 11 years, and 16 years. None of them, even though you've been here in the United States for more than 10 years, um, they were not aware of disability programs. And again, I would just like try to imagine the losses that they lost by not being able to benefit from um, disability programs. Next page, please. So yes, again, going back to the point that so why you might ask that why that service providers were not aware of disability? Why I would argue that the majority of refugee service providers are not aware of disability. Well, this is one of my finding as well. So one of the issues is that in resettlement process, there is no way to detect or identify disability identities. So there is no way for you to identify yourself as a person with disabilities, or there is no process to help you identify whether you have a disability or not. Um, and which leads to refugees coming to the United States, like let's say someone with autism, really not aware that they have disabilities, and they continue, and because the refugee programs are not equipped to identify those with disabilities and help them effectively, then they really continue living in the margins. And imagine like if that social worker did not connect me with the disability organization, I wouldn't be able to really sit here and talk with you, and I would not be able to finish my bachelor, my master, and be a PhD student. Um, so next, please. So some of the policy solutions. So what we need to do, what's next? I believe it is the time to repeal and replace the Refugee Act of 1980. You know, this is very, very old policy. The type of refugees at that time um, are very different than the type of refugees that we are receiving now. Currently, refugees live and stay in refugee camps for, on average, more than 10 years. So, and they are more likely to acquire disabilities. And importantly, that I hope that in new refugee policies that we can recognize the diversity among refugee population, either looking at LGBTQ population or looking at those with disabilities. These are the identities that needs to be recognized among refugees. Um, and again, I think it would be crucial to not divide refugees into two groups, employable and non-employable, and really, drawing that line immediately. No, refugees with disabilities, the majority of them needs a little bit assistance, needs a little bit more time and information in order to be employable. So you cannot make this quick judgment and eliminate this big population. And again, I think disability organization needs to be in the picture. We need to talk about disability services if we want to effectively help refugees, especially refugees with disabilities. with that being said, I would like to open for any question and discussion.
Thank you, Rifat, for a wonderful and insightful presentation. And I will have some thoughts and reflection on that, but we'll take the question that you already have on the chat and also from the class if you have. Yes, just 1 second, Brittany. First question we have, I think, from Bonnibel Lilith. Yes. How many people were forcibly displaced in 2021? I think she didn't catch the number. So if you could give us a number, it would be helpful.
I would say about 50 to 55 million forcibly displaced.
50 to 55 million. Okay.
Yes, again,
Yes.
so a part of this population are internally displaced and a part of it are refugees.
And
So
also, what would be like when we say 50 to 55 million, just because this is an academic talk and everything, what are the legitimate sources from where we get these numbers? Is UNHCR the only legitimate source, or are there other organizations who do these kind of surveys?
I mean, the UN obviously is the leading and most legitimate source. They track this very closely. And again, this is very fluid situation. So it really changes over time. It increases and decreases.
Thank you. Brittany, you had a question?
So I was wondering, like, what was his process like after entering the workforce? If he received any help from the same agency, or like how if these agencies are like very well known, or if they're more and why or why not?
Okay. All right. We have one question from one of our students, Brittany. I will just reiterate to you. And if I misparaphrase, just correct me. Her first, it's a two-part question. The first one is, after you have entered the workforce in the United States, gainful employment, did you find other organization that gives you support, except the one that you mentioned already? And second, tied to this question is this, are these organizations mostly like local or regional, or they are like trans-American where they have branches in each of the different states? Does that summarize? Good summary? Okay, fair enough.
Yes, so absolutely. So one of the things refugees with disabilities face significant discrimination because just think about it. You don't oftentimes speak English. I wish I included the other data about employment, that how refugees who are not fluent in English describe facing marginalization and discrimination in employment, and how they, just because they don't speak English, they don't know about their rights, they don't know about ADA, they don't know about Section 504, they don't know about other disability policy that are designed to protect them. So from my experience and the other refugees with disabilities experiences, legal aid is going to be your friend. So every state, every city has disability organizations. It varies because you have states also playing a role in the support and the type of disability organization. Um, and then, so every state has legal aid, which is an organization designed to provide legal help if you're experiencing, discrimination and things like that. So yeah, I mean, unfortunately, like current disability, so current policies in the United States are designed to discourage, to push away people with disabilities. For example, currently I'm receiving a scholarship because I am a student. I cannot pay $70,000 a year. And I receive Section 8 program, which is a housing program. And when I my graduate school, the Section 8 program cut my program. They were like, no, we are going to count this as an income. I'm like, look, I'm not receiving this money. I'm not using this money. It's the school that is giving the scholarship, and it's the school that is taking the scholarship. And so obviously I could not fight them, so I had to engage the legal aid. So the legal aid were really effective in helping me, and they really reinstated my Section 8. I mean, I cannot pay my rent, which is very expensive as a student. And so, yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yep, you think that is a good job. And yes, I have some thoughts on that too, given on the same boat at some point. But we have some couple of questions. I'll take those and before move on. So this is from Akif Huda, and I'll just reiterate that question verbatim. Thank you for sharing your experience. This was very valuable. My apologies if this was already mentioned, but are displaced persons with disabilities less likely to qualify as refugees for immigration? Are there programs that address this gap? If so, and because we're running short of time, if you give the question answer very succinctly, that would be appreciated too.
That is an excellent question. This is one of the hidden problems that really refugees with disabilities face. So when you get accepted to be resettled in the United States as a refugee, and if you disclose that you are disabled, so your case will be taken by the USCRI and will be sent across the United States for refugee agencies, and the refugee agencies has the discretion to accept you or not accept you. So unfortunately, oftentimes what happens is that because refugee organizations are not aware of disability, they usually I even have my recent data collection, like some of the resettlement director disclosed that there's that exclusion. They do not accept refugees with disabilities because they know they have to give resources, they have to spend more time. So again, it's really a big challenge. If you disclose that you are disabled, then you are less likely to be resettled in the United States. And if you don't disclose that you are disabled and you come to United States, that you have, for example, many social workers were talking about, we get refugees come in the United States, they get to our office, we rented them a house that is in third floor, and then we realize that, oh my God, they have physical disabilities. So this is what happens. Then they have to put this person in a hotel for a long time, and they can't get Medicaid because they don't have address. So their health, they can't access health care. So it's a very complex dynamic. But that's a great question.
Yeah, just to touch on the second part of his question, which I also think is equally important, that are there programs, or that is his question, Mr. Akiv's, but I can also add to that. Are there programs, or do you see any changes in policies happening now that are addressing this particular gap?
Unfortunately, no. I am not aware of any immediate policies that is going to change. But again, we don't know what the new administration is going to do. I believe they are going to dismantle and change refugee programs. Um,
Yeah, just on that, let me bring in the next question, which ties in, segues nicely with what you're currently commenting on. And this is from Scott Harding. And he again thanks you for your presentation and then ask, the incoming Trump administration will likely drastically scale back the USRP. In a context of diminished support for refugee admission and rising xenophobia / anti-immigrant sentiment, how can we effectively advocate for increased support for refugees with disabilities? So you can continue your comment and then move on in taking Harding's questions
yes.
also.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the argument of the new administration is that we don't want illegal immigrants in the United States. Well, if you don't want illegal immigrants, then you need to open a door for legal immigrants. I hate to use these words. There is, in my dictionary, there is no legal or illegal. These are the forced people to their forced out of their home uh, because of because of reasons. Um, so I really need to that we need to bring the we need to push to expand our refugee programs, because that is the established way. There are services in every state and every cities that welcomes refugees. Um, and I really hope that the new administration will not make the same mistake that they did in their previous administration. I mean, at that time, they reduced the number of refugees from 120,000 refugees yearly to 8,000. So imagine the change. And that changed. What happened is that they cut the funding for refugee organizations. What they had, and they had to lay off their experienced staff, and that has significant impact on, especially for refugees with disabilities who needs who need expert staff. But I think when it comes to disability, this is a significant issues. Like, in my that the I interviewed 40 refugees with disabilities. You can it's mind blowing for to see a refugee with disabilities struggling for 10 years to find a job in the United States. And that tells you the neglect that is happening on refugees with disabilities. I think we need to raise the awareness, and we need to bridge the gap between disability studies and immigration studies. So I hope that answered the question. So I mean, this is very complex. Like there's a lot of components in it. But
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I think you do. I think you do. That was a very succinct answer to a issue that we here are basically tackling through a semester. And of course, you being a doctoral student, you understand that it takes years and years of work from a single person, and also, like you mentioned, different collaboration of different institution and decades-long program. Uh, as you mentioned, the last policy was 1980s, which needs to be updated as of now in order for to address the situation that we're facing currently. So I would again encourage the audience participants to drop in question if you have any, but also from the class if you do. But because I skipped the introduction, just to tie in the presentation with what we're trying to do here, this is the introduction in retrospect. So this is our critical refugee studies course, and the theme of this course again was to find the refugee subject as a knowledge producer rather than how people have been stereotypically perceived refugees as legal, illegal, employable, unemployable, and always through the lens of an West-centering bias, which looks refugee as a problem, without looking into how these are people and currently the product of colonization and other stuff, and they all have something to give rather than simply. I'm very glad that you have mentioned this experience, like when the social worker, when you're going through that program in your home country, that you can always rely on social assistance, and you are like, I can do stuff. Like that particular mindset or epistemology, I think, often goes missing, that people do not always seek to receive assistance, but rather the support to do or make something on their own, which I think is missing in the current media portrayal as well. But for the audience, yes, we explored different texts of refugee epistemology throughout the semester, and then we had this series, Reimagining Refugees, and we had 3 speakers all looked into how the refugee subject gives different thing. And Mr. Mustafa Rfat is our third and final speaker. Our first speaker looked into literary representation of refugees. Our second speaker looked at refugees art production through the Rohingya camp in Bangladesh. And as Mr. Rifat here is tying his personal experience with how the policy affects refugees with disabilities even more. And like his talk suggests, marginalized and forgotten, and our students have also given this notion regarding how the broad swath of refugees have different segments in them. First of all, the racial and geographical entity. Somebody from Ukraine might not be treated the same as somebody from Syria or Afghanistan. The religious identity, whether you are from a Muslim segment or you are from other refugees. The racial, whether you are Black, whether you are African American, whether you are indigenous, that thing. And according to that, the disability identity even. Uh, I remember working as an interpreter in the US Army sent some donation for Bangladeshi refugee camp back then. It was a remote region back there, and people were struggling to get food. And the donation that we opened up, the box of package that they have sent, had sets of iPods. So you understand that those are necessary, like they might be, but somebody was not qualified to verify like what is the important stuff right then to give a population which is struggling for food, iPod. And like you mentioned, with the current administration, people might get laid off, who are training to offer support, who understand what is more important, and then people might not have that kind of thing regarding training. So we are nearing the end, but I would like to encourage, for example, tying that question back to you, Mustafa, again. Your journey has been an inspiring one. And even though we worked together in Morgantown, like even I was working as a graduate consultant in your project, oftentimes working on your project inspired me to not complain and focus on my own stuff, given the level of hardship that you went through and the level of motivation it showed. And now that you have come a long way, okay, uh, I'm kind of curious, like what has been your sense of motivation as far pursuing this social work and a PhD even, despite naysayers and people suggesting you that you settle for less? Is it a commitment to prove yourself? Is it commitment to help people with disabilities? What would you say is the driving factor?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you. By the way, Professor Rahman was my English tutor back at West Virginia University. So my main motivation is that so I am a person with physical disabilities. My wife is a refugee with psychiatric disabilities. So we live in this community. We breathe in out. We see our families, we see our relatives, we see our communities day by day struggling, um, being oppressed. Really, my main motivation. And really, my research has also opened the door for me to learn about other refugees with different type of disabilities, especially those who use sign languages. Hearing these horrific stories of, like someone who is using Arabic sign languages and going to the hospital. There is no, and the hospital can't find Arabic sign language interpreter. In my data, two women lost their children because of the lack of interpretation. Um, just this, like the oppression, the marginalization that this community faces on a daily basis, uh, is really the source of motivation for me um, to continue my work. And the beauty of my research is that I'm using community-based participatory method in which I have a community advisory board members that consist of refugees with disabilities, consist of service providers, refugee service providers. So we are really coming together to really brainstorm, see the community priorities, and try to tackle one problem after another.
It's great. And yes, I am glad that you mentioned here we have the TASTE team, and the full form of it for the audience even is the transformation, equity, access, and a sense of belonging. Just highlighting all the aspects that you mentioned, that when we address our students or anybody, even people even with disabilities, it is simply not enough to give them the support, but rather them to feel welcome. That's why we make this program of that the people should have the equal equity access, and also they should find a sense of belonging, like you hopefully are finding in this community that you mentioned while doing the work. We're at the last sweat. I would like to give you just probably a short pitch regarding what your doctoral work is focusing on, how you are developing, so that the audience have an idea if some of them might want to reach out to you to collaborate or participate even regarding what exactly the project that you're working on, your big project.
Thank you. Yes, my dissertation work is on exploring the barriers and facilitators to accessing employment, education, healthcare, and housing among refugees with disabilities. And when I say refugees, I also mean the different categories of immigration status that we have in the United States: asylees, parolees, individuals who are seeking asylum. So all these populations are included. So yeah, I have many hopefully publications coming up related to this topic. I also have a reflection articles that I published last year about my journey as a refugee with disabilities. So if you are seeking more information, you can read the article. But I want to underline here that we have more than 12 million immigrants, you know, underdocumented, or, you know, the media called illegal immigrants. So among them, those with disabilities are, you know, really the forgotten population in the United States, and really need another session to talk about undocumented immigrants with disabilities and the challenges they face, because they really don't have the legal access to the services that available in the United States. And an example of it is that here in the US, we have a policy that every hospital has a right to deport an immigrant who doesn't have paperwork when they get hospitalized. So if the hospital finds that this immigrant is going to be costly for the hospital, they can just get a ticket and deport the person against their will, against the will of their family, deport them back to their country. So there, I mean, yeah, undocumented or underdocumented immigrants with disabilities face extra issues. So I hope in my future endeavor I can also, you know, do work in that area. But hopefully, like I will, yeah, for probably next year, there are many articles and reports that are coming regarding refugees with disabilities. And thank you for this great opportunities. I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you for your excellent questions. I hope you learned. Please reach out if you have any questions. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Rifat. And yeah, that is the new information about the hospital. I did not know that the hospitals could deport people on that notice. And like you mentioned, your title even, I was just like, the entire endeavor for this course and the things that we do in the TEST project itself is to make sure that they do not become marginalized and forgotten. Not only people with refugees or disabilities, but anybody who the dominant narrative is against. And for this semester, our students for their final project is working on how to use their major to write paper in solving one of the problems with the surrounding refugee project. And they are from different disciplines, and we are really excited to see what they come up with in 2 days. But with that, thank you for taking time from the Pacific Northwest to be here. Thank you everyone who have joined us virtually. This has been a great session and a fitting ending to our TEST Reimagining Refugee series. With that, I think I would say adios.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I wish everyone a lovely evening, afternoon, or morning. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.